Imagine this. 37 years after death, an infant's body is found in perfect condition. Scientific anomaly or something more? The story we're about to explore begins not with the discovery, but much earlier, in 1970, Columbus, Ohio. That's when little Brian Thomas Gallagher, just months old, passed away. A tragedy familiar to many families, but the way he was laid to rest and what followed turns this personal loss into one of the most baffling mysteries of our time. The Gallaghers chose what seemed a typical option for their social standing: to bury their baby in the family crypt at Mount Calvary Cemetery. Not just a grave in the ground, but a stone tomb meant to hold generations. What could be more final than burial in a sealed crypt, built to last? The doors closed, time marched on, and Brian Gallagher's name became part of family history. A memory, but not a part of active life. No one could have guessed that this finality would one day be shattered in the most unbelievable way, defying both common sense and the laws of nature. Here, behind these heavy stone walls, in conditions we'll examine, the stage was set for a phenomenon that would shock the world almost 4 decades later. And now, we arrive at the climax, the moment that transformed an ordinary family story into an inexplicable puzzle. It's 2007. 37 years later, the Gallagher family needed to relocate remains from the old crypt. The reason was simple: to make room for a new family member. A routine procedure that should have been uneventful became a scene straight out of a sci-fi horror film. When workers opened the crypt and began moving coffins, they came across Brian's small, sealed metal casket. What did they expect to find? Ashes? Bones? Perhaps decayed remnants of cloth? The usual remains of someone buried for nearly 4 decades. But what they saw was anything but. Instead of the expected decomposition, they pulled out a baby's body that looked as if it had been buried only hours before. Baby Brian Thomas Gallagher lay there, untouched by time. His skin was intact, his features recognizable. Even the clothes he was buried in were almost perfect. This wasn't a mummified corpse, not a skeleton, but what appeared to be a sleeping child. The shocked workers immediately called the police and forensic experts. First responders described their feelings as a mix of horror and utter bewilderment. How could this be? How were the biological processes of decay, inevitable for all living things, halted or bypassed in this particular case? This discovery instantly challenged everything we know about post-mortem changes. A body found in a near-suspended state after 37 years underground. It's not just rare. It's essentially a scientific anomaly. And that's where our investigation begins. We need to find out what or who allowed time to so strangely bypass baby Brian. Once the initial shock gave way to professional curiosity, forensic experts took over. Their mission: to find a logical, scientific explanation for what they saw. And of course, the first theories came quickly. The most obvious suggestion concerned the burial conditions. Baby Brian lay in a metal casket, believed to be hermetically sealed, and the casket itself was inside a stone crypt. This multi-layered protection created a unique, almost anaerobic environment. The theory goes, without oxygen and insulated from moisture and temperature fluctuations, the activity of bacteria responsible for decomposition would be greatly slowed or even completely stopped. This isn't unheard of. It can lead to natural mummification or the formation of adipocere, also known as grave wax, when body fat turns into a waxy substance. However, as a skeptical investigator, I have to ask, is it really that simple? We're not just talking about slow decomposition or partial preservation. We're talking about a body that looked perfect. Skin, features, clothing, everything was practically untouched. Mummification usually makes a body dry and shriveled. Adipocere transforms it into something very different from a living, sleeping infant. Could even exceptional air-tightness completely halt all decomposition for almost 4 decades, preserving such striking freshness? Or are we simply trying to fit an incredible fact into known scientific frameworks, ignoring the nuances and degree of preservation that go beyond ordinary understanding? It's here, at the intersection of rational explanation and shocking reality, that an intuitive feeling arises that there's more to this phenomenon than just a lack of oxygen. So we come to the most interesting part, the heart of a skeptical investigation. If the official explanations of airtightness and an anaerobic environment seem too simple to explain such a striking phenomenon, then what else could it be? My role here is to ask the tough questions and look for details that might have been missed or underestimated. First, let's look at the very idea of perfect airtightness. Crypts, even well-built ones, are rarely completely impermeable. Micro cracks in the concrete, tiny gaps in the seams, the porous structure of the stone. All these are potential pathways for air, moisture, or microorganisms to enter. Of course, the metal casket inside adds a layer of protection, but it's not eternal either. Metal is subject to corrosion, even if it's slow. Could it have remained absolutely airtight for 37 years without the slightest breach? Doubtful. Furthermore, if we're talking about slowing decomposition, why did the body look so fresh and not mummified or turned into adipocere? Mummification requires a very dry environment that dries out tissues, making them tough and shriveled. Brian's body, according to witnesses, wasn't like that. Adipocere, or grave wax, is a chemical transformation of fatty tissue that gives the body a waxy appearance. But it's still not a sleeping infant. None of these scientifically known phenomena explain the degree of preservation described by eyewitnesses. Perhaps it's not just about the lack of oxygen, but about other more specific factors. Were there any chemicals in the crypt or in the casket that could have acted as preservatives? Or more intriguingly, could there have been unique, unexplained microclimatic conditions that created a kind of natural cryochamber or time capsule? Temperature, humidity, soil composition around the crypt. All of this could have played a role, but none of these explanations are standard for such a high degree of preservation. As a skeptic, I must admit that the official explanations, while scientifically based, don't fully answer the question. They don't explain perfection. They explain slowing down. And the difference, you'll agree, is enormous. We must dig deeper, investigate every detail that could provide a clue to this incredible mystery, and not take the first explanation that comes along at face value. If Brian Gallagher's body was so perfectly preserved, perhaps the key lies not only in the casket, but in the crypt itself. It's not just a grave in the ground, but a substantial structure, and its secrets may be far more intriguing than they seem at first glance. As a skeptic, I can't ignore the environment that housed this phenomenon for almost 4 decades. A family crypt is a kind of miniature architectural structure built of stone, often with a concrete foundation and roof. The quality of the materials and the construction are extremely important. Was this crypt built with special care, providing exceptional insulation? Or, conversely, did its age and possible structural features create some unforeseen anomaly? Imagine thick stone walls that provide a stable temperature, minimizing daily and seasonal fluctuations. This is already a significant factor in slowing down chemical reactions and the activity of microorganisms. But what about humidity? If the crypt was dry and well drained, it could have prevented rotting. If there was constant, but not excessive, humidity, combined with a lack of oxygen, it could have contributed to the formation of adipocere, which we've already talked about, but again, not with such freshness. There's another point: the composition of the soil around the crypt. Some types of soil, especially those with a high clay or lime content, may have preservative properties. If the crypt was surrounded by such soil, it could further isolate it from external influences. Were detailed analyses of the soil or microclimate inside the crypt carried out after the discovery? These are critical questions, the answers to which could shed light on the situation, but they often remain behind the scenes in the pursuit of sensationalism. Finally, it's worth asking about any anomalous observations made when the crypt was opened. Were there unusual odors, traces of mold, condensation, or, on the contrary, perfect dryness? Any? Even the smallest detail could be a clue. Perhaps the ideal condition of Brian's body is the result of an incredible coincidence of many factors. A high-quality casket, a special microclimate in the crypt, specific soil conditions, and even, perhaps, chemical processes that we don't yet fully understand. It's not a miracle, but it's not a common event either, but rather a rare, perfect storm of preservative conditions that makes us rethink the limits of what's possible. Why was the preservation so perfect, going beyond all known cases of mummification, adipocere, or slowed decomposition? Were there any unique, undocumented features of the crypt or casket that weren't fully taken into account? Perhaps the composition of the embalming fluid, if it was used, combined with specific environmental conditions, gave such an unprecedented result. Or, as we already suspected, was it a perfect storm of multiple factors, each of which alone couldn't explain the phenomenon, but together they created a unique time capsule? There's still no single, generally accepted theory that fully satisfies a skeptical researcher. The Gallagher case remains a kind of blank spot on the map of our understanding of decomposition processes. It forces us to admit that nature sometimes presents surprises that go beyond textbooks and established theories. And it's this incompleteness of answers that makes the story of Brian Thomas Gallagher so compelling, so mysterious, and so important for those who seek the truth beyond the obvious. So we've come to the end of our investigation, but as often happens with real mysteries, we didn't get a definitive answer. The story of baby Brian Thomas Gallagher isn't just a creepy or amazing news story. It's a rare phenomenon that challenges our knowledge of life, death, and the processes of decomposition. It makes us think about the limits of what we consider possible, and about how many more secrets nature holds. As a skeptic, I can only state the facts are there, but their full and complete explanation still eludes us. We've considered the most logical scientific hypotheses, but none of them fully closed all the questions regarding the degree of preservation. It wasn't just a well-preserved remnant. It was something that caused genuine shock, even among experienced experts. Perhaps this is the true value of such stories. They remind us that the world is full of mysteries, and not all questions have ready-made answers. The story of Brian Gallagher is an invitation to reflect. What do you think could have caused such incredible preservation? Could there have been factors involved that we, the people of the 21st century, don't yet fully understand? Or is it just an incredible coincidence that will never happen again? This mystery remains open, and each of you can now become part of its solution, reflecting on the facts and allowing the boldest hypotheses